It was Christmas Eve. It was dark, winter, very cold, and a bunch of cars came into my grandmother's yard and removed my mother, put her in a police car. My younger sister was screaming. She wouldn't stop screaming. Just driving away, the lights disappearing. And that's what I remember about that evening. I remember being at my grandmother's house, and my mother had taken us there to hide because she knew social services was going to come. My older sister and younger sister were put in one car, and my brothers were put in another car. Everybody, of course, was crying. We didn't know what was going on. We were put into a holding foster home. White foster parents were able to come and view us like they were shopping. And different people came and took my brothers, and they took my sister, and I was the last one, the last puppy to be picked. The initial removal occurred when I was about 6 years old. And part of that was due to what they called at that time neglect.
Only 1% of the cases were for actual abuse. They were mostly for what was called social deprivation or neglect. However, a lot of that was oftentimes things that were cultural. The social workers would come in and the family would be living in a dirt floor chapetake. That is a completely traditional home for Ho-Chunk families. So that would be seen through the Western lens of social workers as child abuse.
Because the standards of living of Native children across time wasn't viewed as to the standard of normal care, children were being removed at a higher rate. And not only were they removed from their homes, but they were placed in non-Native, non-tribal communities.
Eventually, I went into a farm home. It was very, very isolated. I wasn't able to communicate with any of my siblings. I didn't even know where they were. It was the first time that my heart was broken. In that foster home, and really missing my mother. I missed her so much that my heart was aching. For 4 years, you think that you are being told that you are stupid, you are ignorant, you're Indian, you don't belong, you're a savage. And that kind of, even though as old as you get, there's that little thread that says, are you good enough? And for me, it has worked both ways. Am I good enough to be a Ho-Chunk? And I know that comes from that gap, that 4-year gap of learning, of where it's so critical for a child to have that continued reinforcement, that continued love, that continued support of knowing who you are and who your people are.
Here in Wisconsin, you were 1,600% more likely to be removed from your family if you were Indian versus non-Indian. And so ultimately, Congress said that there's something that needs to be done about this. And so out of that was born the Indian Child Welfare Act. So the Indian Child Welfare Act is a piece of federal legislation that was adopted in 1978. And the purpose of the legislation was to address the disproportionate removal of Indian children from their families. They're already going through a very traumatic experience of being removed from their parents. But to then be placed outside of their community, outside of their family, not seeing people that look like them, not eating the foods that they typically eat is a huge piece of their soul being taken from them. And that lasts with you forever. Part of the Indian Child Welfare Act is that, the counties and independent parties are supposed to provide these families with active efforts, services that are culturally appropriate, but also geared towards the issues that led to the removals.
That's where we see the greatest success, is when we can give them the tools to identify these traumas and realize that it's not their fault and how to overcome it later.
We talk about historical trauma and intergenerational trauma. We really want to try and break that by following ICWA to the T and trying to ensure that these children are placed first looking for family, then looking for a member of that child's tribe, then looking for a member of another tribe.
The whole goal of ICWA is to keep kids in their communities and with their families. Bottom line is what we're trying to achieve through it.
When I came back and listening to, my parents and other elders talk Ho-Chunk, it was very, very, very soothing. It was very comforting to hear that language, to hear the language, to hear Ho-Chunk. If children aren't allowed to be within that culture, they're missing a gap. There's a hole, you hear about children, Indian children that have been adopted, and they say there's a hole inside, and they don't know what it is. There's something missing. And once they get back to their culture and language and participate in the traditions, that hole becomes filled again. Even having the experience that I had in foster care, my strength was always and has been the Ho-Chunk Nation. My people, the people I belong to, is the Ho-Chunk Nation.